Good afternoon, everybody. I'm HB Klopper at Vinci, the Executive Dean, Research and Institutional Partnership. This is our monthly Curiosita session. Now, for those in Vinci that know Curiosita, this is where we like to simulate a roundtable discussion. And sometimes you sit with your back to other people and people will talk to you. It's not about who said what, it's about what's being said. And we discover, and following that, and the meaning of Curiosita, in actual fact, if you go and read up about that, is seeking truth. So we almost want to see what's the truth, and I'll not say that, is seeking truth. And we do that through having these sessions of curiosity, looking at where we go, having different topics, bringing in different speakers. And then we will have our student speaker, our doctoral candidate, Bheki Mdakane, that will talk to us about his specific topic. And we're also privileged to have a supervisor here, Prof. Ronnie Lessem, in our presence this afternoon. And Tippa will talk to us about her topic. And in that, we'll have a back and forth discussion, sharing some thoughts, asking some questions. So as an icebreaker, I normally pick something from the press on that specific day that's relevant. Now, I've got two topics that I want to say, and the first one is maybe we need to first of all acknowledge that today is Africa Day. It's a very special day, so it's a coincidence. I only picked it up yesterday, and me and Tipo spoke about it just now, so it's actually very appropriate on Africa Day to also look into the future and say, where are we going? What are we busy with? What's our concrete experience, and how do we conceptualize where we're going? So let's, in the spirit of Africa Day, also embrace sharing this opportunity to share some thoughts with each other. Talking about Africa, we had a guest speaker at our graduation this morning that spoke about Africanacity, and the same last night at the doctoral graduation. And as I was sit there, I wondered to myself, when we look at the concept of graduateness or graduate attributes, as graduates walk out, what should that be? Because where I'm sitting as a firm believer of heterogogy, not talking about pedagogy, the learning of school people, or andragogy, the learning and teaching of adult learners, but heterogogy in terms of self-directed learning. Now that you have a PhD or you decided you don't need to further your qualifications and you engage with others, you listen to the news, you do your own reading, how do you give direction, the self-directedness in your study? I think it's very appropriate to reflect on graduateness. Now, many authors and authorities on the space will give you lists of skills and capabilities. At the end, if you distill them, we must maybe try and prioritize them. And I believe one of the key attributes, if we look at Africa, and you will find them in the African agenda, you will find them in the development plans of most of the countries, is to have an entrepreneurial spirit or entrepreneurship, which is also very appropriate on Africa Day, why we have the topic of Chipo talking about entrepreneurship in Africa. So we need to unpack that. So my question into the audience, as we reflect on you, where you currently stand as an adult, very successful in business, working full-time, and you think about your own days, you studied, while you're still studying, what are the key attributes that we should have? So maybe we should not talk about graduate attributes, we should talk about graduateness and say there's no end to that. Now, obviously, starting curiosity, we say you need to be curious. That can trigger creativity. And if you follow that line of thinking, it will go into sense making. And at the end, we might even touch on critical thinking. So what are the key attributes we should possess these days to be successful as people on the continent, people in your country, to not just make a difference, but also have a real impact in the lives of other people, moving our countries and our continent, and for that matter, the rest of the world, and the general humankind on planet Earth forward. And maybe that is where we should go. So my question then, anybody that have specific thoughts on what are the good graduateness or the graduate attributes that we should possess, moving beyond the typical skills and capabilities that we'll find people listing in the space of education or higher education specifically?
For me, Doc, it's the groundedness of individuals that have actually attained a level of education or a level of qualification. Why am I saying that in terms of groundedness? Is the fact that we tend to look at people that have achieved academically being aloof from the reality that we actually exist in. And therefore, I would like to have that connectedness within the communities in terms of saying your qualification does not necessarily put you far above the others, because you always learn from other people. Therefore, groundedness would be one thing that I would actually like to see more of academia or academic people getting into. That is now not shunning the individuals that have not had the opportunity to attain a certain level of education. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Bheki. I think groundedness, and I like what you've pointed, it needs to be grounded in the sense of being connected to other people. So this is not a lonely journey, and we need to put that in context of our community. I saw Dr. Lloyd have a hand raised, Shirley, from your side.
Thank you, Prof. I think for me, from my particular world of study, the issue of trying to find being solution-driven. My world of study and my work has been in the education space, recognition of prior learning, etc. And the COVID epidemic or pandemic globally has raised one huge global issue. It has highlighted the inequity of populations in all countries. And it's led me to thinking a lot about what can I do in my space, and how do I bring solutions to help find solutions, if I can, to inequity, unemployment, poverty, and those millions of young people and learning adults, but young people who do not have access to be able to learn. It's a whole generation now impacted. So for me, one of the graduateness is being solution-driven with very much a social return on investment sort of a lens.
As you speak, maybe we should, in our definition, also say to each other, instead of giving to attributes and characteristics, we must almost also think about activities in there. So it must be solution-driven. What can you do to have that social return on investment? The whole question around graduate attributes, what do we need to think of from a pedagogy perspective, or in layman's terms, if I look at self-directed study. So as I'm mature, I maybe said I now achieved my doctorate and I'm not going to do a postdoctorate, but I'm a full-time civil servant working for my company. What are the attributes that we need to possess? In essence, what will make us whole, if we want to refer to it in that way? What will bring us peace to say we start making a difference and with an impact that moves the needle, in simple terms? Hello, Raymond.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So are we looking at from the angle of the student or the lecturer, or both?
Raymond, that's a good question. So what we started off when we look at a typical pedagogy, where we say that self-directed study. So that's in essence where you are determining your own future. So you don't need a lecturer or a peer to necessarily guide you. So it's not in the pedagogy space as on school, or in the andragogy space where most universities in the mode 1 are. In a mode 2 where we are co-creating, we actually say, I take responsibility for my own education and knowledge production in future. So what are the attributes that I should display to be true graduates or graduateness, to be true scholars of life, if you would maybe put it in that way? So my question, or the answer then, is beyond the lecture, beyond your classmates. So when you, Raymond, say, I'm taking control of my own future, and this is where I go, what are those characteristics or attributes as we move into the 5th industrial revolution phase? I hope that helped, Raymond.
Yes, it does help.
Maybe while Raymond is looking at his connection, sorting that out, I see, and I'm not sure, I think in the order, Janet, you were first, and then Passmore, but let's first go to Janet, then Passmore, and we will come back to Raymond then.
Hello, everybody. I think this is a fabulous question. I could talk about this all day. I've been doing a lot of work around 21st century leader skills and really what is it that helps us make a difference. I have a whole model, which I won't share with you. But essentially, I think there are a few things. The first is we have to look at people as whole people and who they are being, not just what they know. So I think about people as physical, social, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual beings, and we have to pay attention to all of those. And this framework is essentially ordered around 4 what I call core competencies. The first is the ability to influence, being articulate, and we could debate that word. There's lots in that, but we can no longer operate in a world of control and command. We have to be able to affect people and enroll people without instructing them, without ordering them. It's a whole different paradigm that I think is going to be more and more required. Raymond mentioned critical thinking. I think there's the second area is around insight and awareness. And that would include the ability to think in complexity, paradox, cognitive flexibility, the ability to be digitally fluent. There's a long list. I think that this is the area in many respects that has been most neglected because we've filled people's heads with knowledge, but we haven't necessarily always helped them to think. The third area relates to relationships and how we connect with people and, again, enroll people, create psychological safety. And the last area, and this kind of relates to what Shirley was saying, is the ability to actually do things, to implement, to manage strategy and implement strategy in whole new ways that didn't exist before. So those would be my 4: influence, insight, interdependence, and implementation.
Very nice. Sure, Janet, that's a mouthful, and I think it's a well-rounded, holistic approach. So it will be very interesting to, at a point, look at that piece of paper that you flipped there. I saw a diagram, and diagrams always intrigue me. But I think the point you make is important. And if I look at Raymond's comment and that struggle with the connection, is saying being able to make decisions and solve problems. And I think you shed some light on that, and I see there's thumbs up. That contribute to sustainable development. So there must be an impact. And, that sustainable development has got all the economic and social return on investments for the community. So I think, Raymond, that's a very powerful words that you put down there in the comments. And Janet's model with those 4 points definitely talk to that. Passmore, you next. Passmore Matupere, and then I would like to go to Ronnie. But Passmore, you first.
Thank you very much, Prof. Good afternoon, everybody. If I understood what you're asking for, I got it to mean that you are looking for the attributes of, did you say graduates?
Yes.
I think there are so many. I'll probably just talk about 2 or 3. For me, I feel that maybe one which is critical is that of being authenticity. I think it's a key attribute, particularly in this world in mutation, in this VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, chaotic, and ambiguous. One needs to be authentic. Authenticity is key. And also, in a world where we need to be interdependent, you need to, there is need to respect other people, but for you to be able to do that, you must have self-respect. Respecting yourself, self-respect as a graduate. And of course, in this part of the world, one should exhibit Ubuntu, UNU, particularly from an African perspective. I think let me end here for now. Otherwise, I will take a lot of time.
Yeah, because I think this is probably a topic we can speak a lot about. But Ronnie, you had your hand raised, and thereafter I will look in the direction of Ndengarai. But Ronnie, you first.
This is a kind of prelude to Chipa talking about Chitubu, and yesterday we had Dajshumba Taranika talking about Kumusha. And I'm picking up on the thread of groundedness. And what I'm finding totally astounding and remarkable is the way that every single society on this earth loses its way. And there's no set of agencies in that society to correct that process. In other words, I first discovered this when I studied Russia. And Russia in the 19th century developed something called cosmism, which was homegrown in Russia, and then reverted to communism and has now reverted to capitalism, which has absolutely nothing to do with Russia. And at that stage, I said, well, that's Russia. Strange goings on. I then discovered the same in Ireland. I'm very involved with Ireland at the moment, and discovered that there was a major movement in the early 20th century in Ireland, the Gaelic revival and cooperativism, and then Ireland became the Celtic Tiger, which has absolutely nothing to do with where the Irish are actually coming from. And now I'm coming to the key point because it's having such a phenomenal impact on the world. For the last 6 months, I've immersed myself in China. And what I've discovered in China is that around the 1920s and 1930s, there was a major transformation in China, which had absolutely nothing to do with communism or capitalism. There were many figures, Chinese intellectuals, but the one who stands out is somebody by the name of James Yen. James Yen was a Chinese who then went to America and came back to China, and he started the mass education movement. And you see the connection here with Da Vinci. The mass education movement was an extraordinary phenomenon. Thousands and thousands of people, hundreds and hundreds of schools, universities, rural reconstruction, all took place around two elements, the homestead and cooperation. Those two elements writ large. Then along came the nationalists and the communists, and they killed it off. They absolutely killed it off. And China became the factory of the world. In becoming the factory of the world, it killed off agriculture. And the whole genius in the 1920s was around rural reconstruction. I hope by now you can see the connection with Africa. A very similar tendency that we're seeing. So what I'm coming around to is in terms of groundedness. We have to rediscover what are our genuine grounds, our chitubu, our kumusha. And then there's one subtle twist. I've always wondered why Albert Koopman was the genius that he was in the Cashville days. The subtle twist is that most of these Chinese that I'm talking about went to Harvard. And you're saying, what are they doing going to Harvard? But what actually happened is they retained and they renewed their Chinese roots. They then reached out to America. America reached back into China, and you had this co-evolution between America and China in the 1920s and the 1930s as the most remarkable phenomenon. And what do we have today? We have rivalry, competition, killing each other off. So this is all about the importance of groundedness for real. And we'll hear more about it from Chipa in a few minutes.
Yeah, very nice. Now, Ronnie, thank you for that, because I think it is good to get that holistic perspective of what happened over decades in other parts of the world. So I do think that's definitely valuable to reflect on that. And, you know, I believe it's a nice introduction for this afternoon. The last question then, or allowing Nkengarai, you have your hand up for a while now. In the old world, we would say your hand is probably tied, but as you have raised it, your view, and then I'm going to step over to Bheki.
Good afternoon, Prof. As I was listening to everyone, my thoughts are more on the word wisdom, because people often equate wisdom with intelligence or with being knowledgeable. But all too often, what we found is that being intelligent and being wise are quite different things. Because wisdom implies more than merely being able to process information in a logical way. Knowledge becomes wisdom when we have the ability, I think, to assimilate and apply this knowledge and then make the right decisions. For me, I believe wisdom implies more than merely being able to process information in a logical way. And knowledge only becomes wisdom when we have the ability to assimilate and apply this knowledge to make the right decisions. Wisdom can be looked at from both a cognitive and emotional perspective. Cognitively, wise people have the ability to see the big picture. They are able to put things into perspective, and they're able to rise above their personal viewpoint and observe a situation from, I think, many different angles. So they avoid the simplistic black and white thinking. Whereas from an emotional kind of like perspective, people acknowledge for their wisdom are reflective, introspective, and tolerant of ambiguity. They know how to manage negative emotions and possess both empathy and compassion, qualities that are different, that differentiate them in like an interpersonal context, in an interpersonal context. Thank you.
No, thank you for that. I think you made a few valid points, and if I try and maybe summarize that, there's almost, if I listen to you, there's a calling for next level of maturity that need to kick in, and there's a few characteristics, and I think that ties in with what Ronnie also said. So yeah, I think this is a fascinating topic, and maybe we must unpack some of these things in future. I want then to look at Mr. Bheki Mdakane. He's our current doctoral student, doing his study on the enterprise and supply development in mining. And you all saw in the invite the short bios of Bheki and Dr. Nduzo. Maybe just to say in short terms before I give over to you, Bheki, that besides doing his study in the enterprise and supply development in mining, Bheki was really born, raised and baptized, or born and baptized and then raised and matured in mining and understand what mining is about. And he's really passionate about this enterprise and supply development, and he understands the intricacies and the challenges. And that's part of what he will be talking about, his methodology at the moment as he near the empirical data collection phase of his study. So without further ado, it's an honor to have you here, Mr. Mdakane. Bheki, you're welcome to chip in, and you have about 10-15 minutes to talk to us about your study. We will, in that 15 minutes, also facilitate questions. And thereafter, we will look in the direction of Dr. Chipundunju. Bheki, floor yours. We're very curious about your methodology that you follow. What are your challenges? What's your lines of thought? Where are you taking this study?
It's a pleasure for me to be sharing the platform with you. Before I delve into the research methodology that I'm actually undertaking, we are all aware of the intricacies and complexities that happen in the mining areas that have got to do with the strikes from time to time when the mine loses production and stuff like that. Now, due to what I've heard today in terms of our discussion and the attributes, I think some of the things that come up would be, are we grounded enough as the sector to understand what is it that is happening within the communities that we actually are operating in? Or are we actually saying they are rabble rousers because we are looking at this thing purely from an economic point of view? However, in that space, there is a lot of critical thinking that needs to get in from a supplier point of view, enterprise and supply development point of view of a practitioner. The research, the methodology that I'm actually going to be approaching is that I'm going to be taking this from a point that says I'm going to stratify my stakeholders. Let me say, why do I have to stratify my stakeholders? I've got the mining industry on the other side. I've got the community members on the other side. I've got the regulator on the other side. I've got consultants that churn this information out in terms of saying, this is what is supposed to be happening within the areas that we operate in. Then from that perspective, my stratification, when I draw my interview guides, I'm going to be having specific questions for the people in the mines themselves, because the intention of my study is to compile or actually construct a model that says, I'm looking at the mining industry in terms of saying, when you have these strikes, and the people say, we want job opportunities and we want to be part of your value chain. What is it that you are actually doing internally? Because that is not just a vague threat. There should be something there that is happening, and we need to understand exactly what is it that the community is actually experiencing. Then they can't take advantage of the opportunities that we have, because we always say there are opportunities, but people in the rural areas, like I am in the rural area in the Northern Cape, Postmansberg, and we have very little of these companies taking advantage of this. But what is the cost? What is the cost? That's now where I'm actually coming in terms of what's the wisdom in that? What is it that is, what are the nuances that we're not looking at? Yes, let me make an example in terms of saying, there is a person that would say, I've made partnership with a person from the Northern Cape, therefore the money is spent in the Northern Cape. But if that is the case, it wouldn't have happened with the your Free State of this world, where there was gold mining and there's now ghost towns. That should not be happening, because we actually sugarcoating this whole aspect in terms of saying there is companies within the area where we mine. However, there is nothing like that, because it's people that we've brought in as joint partners. But the real people, when I leave with my skills, they are left hanging. Therefore, that is bound to fail and become a problem. That is the manner in which I'm going to approach my study. And the challenges that I've got, Prof, is that within the mining space, or anywhere where there is enterprise and supply development, you'll find people saying, we do not benefit and we want 30%. There is a 30% set aside within the government spectrum, and therefore that people want to have that happening in the private sector. Isn't that creating a conflict? There is a conflict there. And how does this conflict come in? The regulator, because it's DMRE, it is regarded as government, and therefore by the fact that we are governed in the mine by MPRDA, which is the Mining Petroleum Resources Development Act, people believe that the government is actually in charge, and yet it is the government in charge. However, in a different platform, there is now where the regulator comes in, and the regulator, because it's political, it would not stand for the truth. They would actually pit you against the people, because they know the more instability there is in the area, and they come in, they are regarded as the saviors of the situation, because they'll be rhetorically speaking to the people in the community other than solving the problems as they're supposed to. That is now, I am looking at the study in a sense that says, what is it that is failing the local communities to take advantage of making sure that they become part of the value chain? And within the 21st century, we know that there are two things that are in place. There is lack of employment, and also within the lack of employment, there is skills shortages. We should not run away from that. The skills shortages is a major driver in the whole aspect. But now we need to take it in a different level in terms of saying, I'm not looking at here any entrepreneur for the sake of being entrepreneurial. I'm looking at now what are the, I think the Prof, your icebreaker played very well in terms of saying, I'm looking at the attributes of the SMME directors. You as a director of this company, what are your challenges? You've formed the company, what are your challenges? The mining industry, this person says is a director of the company, what is it that you can assist this person with so that the person can grow? You see, because at some stage, what you'll find, Prof, within the regulator is that we need to spend a certain percentage of your net profit after tax. For the enterprise, it's 1% net profit after tax, which could be, it depends what is it that you actually have. But 1% is huge money. Then you are supposed to spend 2% net profit after tax for your suppliers, people that are within your value chain or within your supply chain. But you do spend this money. And guess what do you spend this money on? You spend this money on people that are coming from Joburg, because the money doesn't flow and sustain the people within the area where you mine. Hence, when you leave, there is always an area where people would say, let's say historically, we have these issues that are saying, no, people are coming in here to mine and they will leave us blank. It's historical knowledge, it's there. How do we change the tide? That is what Bheki is looking at in terms of his study. And from that perspective, I'm going to be, it's going to be qualitative in nature, because I'm going to have a discussion with people so that they can actually tell me and be free what is it that they are actually understanding. And I'm guarded in terms of my biasness that it's going to be the people, if I can mention the area, Prof, am I allowed to mention the area where I'm at?
But I think this is a safe space to test your idea, Bheki. So you can do that.
Okay, thanks, Prof. We've got what we call here in the Northern Cape, Gamagara Mining Corridor, Development Corridor. It starts from Kuruman, where there is manganese mining. It ends at Postmansberg, where I'm at, with iron ore. You can tell now you've got a very diverse area. And I've been fortunate that I worked within the two spaces. I worked in the manganese area, and I prayed that I can get into the iron ore space, and I got that. Now I've got the whole host community. I've got the understanding of how it operates. I've been here from 2015, and I'm actually immersing myself within the community here in terms of a enterprise and supply development practitioner on day-to-day basis. I observe these things, I make notes, and it becomes very interesting. Now, the challenge that one has, as the Prof would understand, that within my ethical clearance, I was actually supposed to have a gatekeeper's letter. I'm skeptical of having a gatekeeper's letter in the sense that there is a myriad of forums that mushroom from time to time. Because I'm in this area which is volatile, for retaining the authenticity of my study, I am saying I'm going to approach them as individuals other than being a forum of some kind, because now one forum would say, why are our members not interviewed? Or I might find myself in a corner where I do not have all the blessings of all these forums that are mushrooming. That's the challenge. But the interesting part is that one is looking at creating a model, the model that could be scalable from this tiny 300-kilometer radius into one, and scalable within the mining sector wherever in any province where there are issues. Because in as much as I'm talking about enterprise and supply development, there are aspects that are within the subtext or substructures, your stakeholder engagement. How do you engage your stakeholders? Now I've got all this whole host of stakeholders in terms of saying, is a practitioner at the mining house or at the particular mining house geared to understand stakeholder engagement before you actually make any articulation in terms of this is what is happening? Do you understand the nuances? Do you understand the culture of the area in which you are at? Personally, I'm from Joburg, but I was born and bred in Soweto, and that's it. But through my journey, I've learned to understand that it is better to understand the context and the circumstances where you are at in order to come up with solutions that would be everlasting, and therefore you'd actually be making sure that your study has credibility, that your study adds to the body of knowledge that is existing. A lot of studies have been done within entrepreneurs, but mine is specifically looking at what is it that the entrepreneur is doing not to push through the mining. One, the mining industry is an extremely regulated industry. Now you can tell when I say it's a highly regulated. Are we using the safety issues as a gatekeeping on these people to come in? Those are the things that I'm actually looking at. And now when it comes to the money, enterprise and supply development, where do you spend it? The companies that you are actually assisting, are they 51% black owned? Let me explain why do I mention 51% black owned. 51% black owned means you have a partner somewhere. He might not be within the space where you are at. And if it's 51% black owned, are you sure that the 51% black owner from the area where he's at is capacitated enough? Is he making decisions in your company? Or is just a token, is just a front? These are the things that actually saying I'm looking at in terms of how my data is going to be gathered and analyzed and stuff like that. But it's a complex matter. Yeah. Qualitative is actually going to assist me. Interviews, unplanned, unstructured interviews are going to assist me. And I'm going to take something like with one individual, probably 2 to 3 hours, because I would like to make a conversation so that I understand really. And the people that I'm targeting is people that I know are in the area and have been practicing or in business for 2 to 3 years. And some of them are actually providing services to the mine. How did they make it? Yeah. How did they make it when we say usually that there is no skills around the areas where we are at? That is now, I intend to demystify that myth that companies cannot be, people from the internal areas cannot be assisted.
Yeah. Bheki, this is fascinating, and we had the long discussion last week, so I find it a very interesting study, but I think in context of what we spoke about, you highlighted a few important aspects, and we'd like to get some comments from the floor. But I think a point you make that tie back to the previous one and slot into the next one is probably, you need to have that contextual, relevant understanding of what needs to be done here and now for the future with whom. I think that's important. I see there's a hand up from Ronnie. It might be an old hand, but Gibson just joined. Gibson, you're also in the mining, but you in the Witbank, the eastern part of the country. So you were up the other day in Curiosita, but do you have any input guidance that you want to give through to Bheki in this regard?
I'm actually more centralized. I'm working for the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy in Pretoria. Well, I am in the mining industry in a way. I am a stakeholder. A mention was made of the mining industry being a highly regulated industry. Yes, I agree. When we say it is highly regulated, from which angle are you coming from? And from which statutes are you referring to? Department of Labor, Department of Health, the MRE. Why I'm raising this? There is a policy lacuna, serious policy gaps currently in South Africa. It's one area that, notwithstanding the good intention of all the statutes that were put in place post 1994 and before 1994, there's still the tendency of working in silos amongst government departments. It's something you need to look at, because I can tell you now, the working relationship between, example, Department of Labor, the MRE, Department of Health, Department of, is not at a level where it should be. Then it affects our policy framework. It's not developing at the speed of need. So now it sometimes it renders certain policy and certain statutes, they end up gathering dust. So you need to really look at that to say, is there a gap? What can you do to make that regulation, those regulations really work for the industry? Thanks.
Thank you, Gibson. I think that's very valuable input. So, Bheki, I hope that helped. What I can do, if you have questions, I don't think, Gibson, you will mind if the two of you, I put you in connection with each other. But I think you make a very valid response over and above the DMR that Bheki mentioned. Really appreciate that. Yeah.
It's on the nub where I am. I'm looking at 3 statutes. I'm looking at mine health and safety, which is what holds the engineers accountable. I'm looking at MPRDA itself, with the stakeholders. I'm also looking at skills development in terms of the SETAs. That's just to give you because remember, I'm looking at the skills development as well. Thanks, Prof.
Dr. Lloyd, Shirley, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you very much, Prof. If I understand correctly what Bheki some of the things that he's looking at would be to look at skills transfer. If I understood him, he said that people come to an area, the mining companies, and they would use local labor, maybe bring in their own labor as well, and people, and when they leave, there's been no skills transfer. And what to do about that would be one issue. So I think if he has a look at the National Development Plan, for example, and looks at other of the labor regulations, labor policies, education policies, to look at what is currently being proposed in terms of skills transfer. And then the other issue he seems to raise is how do we make sure that we reach the proper stakeholders, we engage correctly without endangering ourselves maybe, or leaving some people out. And I think, and I know I've mentioned it before, but that socioeconomic impact assessment study, the CS process, if you look at that, it creates an environment for you to make sure you are covering all the bases in terms of engaging with the different stakeholders, who they all should be, and what the impact should be. And that, again, will bring in the issue of skills transfer. Have you actually transferred skills to the local community that they are able to go on sustainably with the issues that you, or with a project, or with whatever you brought there? So just those two issues.
Yeah. Thank you, Shirley. I look at Gibson's face and I see he found it valuable, and I believe that's valuable input. So it's come down to what skills need to be transferred, and we're asking the question, what are those skills, by looking at the long term. So I think that was an interesting discussion, and I think, or not think, I know, Bheki, at the colloquium that we will soon have for you, we will further integrate this matter. So this is very exciting.